Welcome to Ordinary People, Extraordinary Things. I'm here with Gabriela. Thank you for being on.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, Nancy.
I'm so excited. We just started chatting via email and so gracious that you said yes to being on the show.
Yeah, I'm honored to be invited. Thank you. And I'm so excited to feature you on the site. So
Yes, yes, I get to be on your site, Modern Witnesses. And could you tell we just have so much in common, I feel like, just from your information on your website. I'm like, oh my goodness, I feel like we have the same goals and we're just kind of
yeah,
doing that in different ways, which is really cool.
yeah.
Well, before we get into that, I do want to ask if there's three words or phrases that describe you.
Three words or phrases that describe me. Um, I'd say scrappy, uh, um, bold, and I'd say empathetic.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so scrappy and bold and you have empathetic. That's probably a good mixture. Can you give like an example of why you would say that?
Yeah, I mean, scrappy, I'm someone who, if something needs to get done, I will figure it out. Like, I will find a way. Even if it's like the most unconventional thing, it will happen. So,
Right.
I feel like that's something that, faith has played a big role in because I feel like when you know that God is with you, you're just like, yeah, I can do this. Like he's right here. Like he's got my back. We're doing this together. So I think that faith really emboldens us. And so I think that's also part of the boldness. I'm a very direct person. I work in a very what would be considered a masculine environment. I'm an attorney. And so I feel like there's a certain assertiveness that you have to have in that field that I understand that not everyone has. And so I recognize that in myself, for better or for worse. And empathetic, um, I care about people. I love people. It's all about people. I'm such a big believer that God created us for community and that we need each other. We change each other. Our stories change, each other. So it's like I I've also had my own journey, just like everyone else. And so I love stories and I love hearing people's stories. And someone really wise once said that, when we tell a story, when we're trying to connect with someone, it's not so much about us, but it's about whether that person can connect with the elements of our story. And I feel like that's the power of story. And so I I love looking for that in people and hearing about their experiences and thinking spiritually about how my faith can connect to that or how I can connect to that and vice versa.
Wow. I love that. Yeah, well, the boldness and the scrappy kind of like, oh, an attorney, that makes sense why you'd have to, not have to, but that would be good for your career, to be able to be bold for someone. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like my wiring. So
Right, right. That's awesome. And then what would you say to someone that's like you're saying we're built for community that's maybe they've been hurt. I mean, well, we've all been hurt by people,
yeah.
but that kind of want to give up on community. Do you have any thoughts or what you might say to them?
I mean, it's tough, right? We've, like you said, we've all been hurt. And as someone who works with people, anyone who works with people, whether it's like retail, doctor, anyone, people are difficult. Just are. Um, and we are difficult too. And
Right.
so part of it is this reframing of, thinking about who we are in community. Um, and I guess sort of looking at what has been excused or forgiven of us.
Mm,
C.S. Lewis has this quote where he says something along the lines of, it's so hard sometimes to forgive others, but the person we forgive over and over again is ourselves, right? And so it's like this idea of sometimes there's two things. Sometimes the desire to not be around community can come from this idea that we're better than others and we deserve better. And that aspect can have like a lack of humility, right? Because there's like a lack of awareness of the scripture says all have fallen short of the glory of God. That includes us, right? So it's like we're all in the same canoe kind of thing. And then the other side of the coin can be like genuine hurt and fear, but I think that that's driven by fear. Um, I was on a coaching call not long ago. I'm part of the Arena, which is a coaching program that Erwin McManus leads out. He's a minister, and it was interesting because someone was asking about this concept, and he said, "I would be wary of someone who has no one in their circle because that means you are not fulfilling God's will for you."
Mm,
Like there's just this basic point that no matter who you are, how great you are, how not great you feel you are, um, no matter how many times you've been hurt, you are wired for community. Like that is God's intention toward you.
mm,
And so I see it, it's not optional. It's almost it's like a command. It's like
mm.
tithing. It's like there's things that just are because God is God and you are who you are. And I think that it's important to always remember that God, when he commands us or like tells us to do something, it's because he knows how we're wired. He wired us. And
Mhm.
so he knows what's best for us. And so I think that even in the midst of pain, or difficult seasons, it's just important to remember that God has a plan through that. And it may not be evident there, then and there. And, I've been hurt by community too, but I've also been totally rescued by community, where community has come through for me in wild ways. And so it's the idea of there's a saying that you can't numb one emotion without losing another. They say you can't have joy without pain.
Mm,
And so I think it's the same thing in here where it's like we can have bad experiences. We can also have good experiences. And so if you shut it out completely, you're going to have neither.
mm,
And so you have to remain open to this idea of community and also have grace for the fact that we are all so imperfect.
mm. That's good. That's really good. I keep on kind of coming back whenever as I am an introvert, so sometimes I'd rather just kind of shrink in. Though I do have a lot of community, sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to be by myself for a while. I just think about how Jesus put himself into community and he was hurt in community and he knew he would be and but he always went towards it and so that's something that I always kind of think of when I don't know, struggling maybe with
Yeah.
it.
I love the idea of Jesus though, because I think that sometimes we have concepts of what community look like that may not be the most healthy, or they may lack boundaries, but Jesus was someone who, you know, Jesus was so wise. I mean, he was discerning, right? And he teaches us how to engage. Jesus also took time alone. Like
Mm.
you said, he was hurt by someone from his inner circle. I mean, he's an example in so many ways. And so I love the idea of looking to Jesus. It's not about what culture tells you or what a
Mm.
church tells you to do. Sometimes we do need to have discernment. Sometimes there's people who are not that well intentioned around us, and like you said, also sometimes we're wired differently. Some of us are extroverted and some of us have a social battery that, we have our limits and we have other giftings and that's important to take into consideration too. Absolutely.
Well, that wasn't even on our list, but that was awesome.
Well,
So,
it's important. Nothing looks one way, right? There's no recipe. So, yeah.
so is it your boldness and obviously your faith and your empathy and your stories? I hear all those things when I look at your website, Modern Witnesses, like we were talking about. What made you want to start this ministry?
I mean, like I said, I love people, and I'm someone who has always gravitated toward writing. Growing up, I was part of, I'm a millennial, so I was part of that culture that was really into magazines. And
Yeah.
then internet came in, like, as we were becoming young adults, and, I guess internet became really big when I was in high school, and I guess going into college. And so I loved reading interviews with people. I loved features. I studied journalism. So again, I was so into this idea of storytelling. And I also recognized that there were so many amazing women around me that were doing things for God and God was doing things through them. And while it's cool to read about, someone's favorite lipstick, I was like, there's there's way more important stuff that people are doing. And I feel like, in the secular sphere, there's nowhere that I see that featured. And I wanted to provide a space for that woman who's a woman of faith, who's doing things. And it started out really with my friends. So the first interviews are all folks that I know very well, and it then branched off to friends of friends. And then I started cold emailing and messaging people that I saw on websites or social media that I really liked. And they started accepting. And then I would ask them, like, do you know a woman of faith who would be interested? And so it just kept like growing into this big ripple effect. And I've been so blessed. We featured people from around the world, wildly different lives. We have women who are in ministry. We have women who are stay-at-home moms and are, happy to do that. We have people who go to Fashion Week and they're happy to do that. And it's just like such a diverse group of women. And I thought it was really important to show that. I think sometimes like Christian culture can sort of tell us that a woman of faith looks a certain way, and when you're not maybe wired for that, you can feel really out of place or like, God, am I making a mistake? Is this really my calling? Is this really what life looks like for me? And so it was, and I believe that, yes, like God calls us to wildly different adventures. And so I wanted a place that showcased that and showed like the beauty of just every adventure, and made women feel affirmed in what God was calling them in and made them feel celebrated. We try to celebrate, we do shout outs for birthdays, graduations, new jobs, bought my own apartment, had a baby, got engaged, like all these things. And it's been beautiful. And then we've been really fortunate to have publicists find the site. And that's how we started featuring authors. And we started featuring author interviews, excerpts, and supporting book launches. And it's been a really fun adventure. So I loved every minute of it.
That is so cool. Yeah, like I said, the thing that drew me to your website the first time, well, I saw someone that was on it and I was like, whoa, what's this? And so I'm checking it out and I just see all of these words that just really drive at me, like hope and stories, and like everyone has a story. And I was like, oh my goodness, we're speaking the same language.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I'm grateful, like I'm so glad that you have the ministry that you have. It's important. Like we need more of this. I think especially coming out of the pandemic, we have experienced isolation in many ways.
Mhm.
Sometimes even outside of the pandemic, sometimes there's times where we feel alone, and it's so important to remind the army of women out there who's serving God that you're not alone. Like there's a whole like army and cohort of us out here praying and keeping faith and praying for each other and just wanting God to transform us and have him reflect his image to the world through us.
Yeah. I know that one thing that made me kind of start the podcast is that I felt like a lot of the podcasts that Christian podcasts I was listening to featured the same people over and over and over and over, like your big name
That's great.
Christians, right? And
Yep.
not that I don't love hearing their story, but I was just like, is no one else doing anything like for God? Like there's
Yeah.
gotta be more stories out there of like just normal people doing great things for God. And so I just felt like God was saying, yep, do it. Yep, you do
Um,
it. And I tried to get away from it for a while. It's like, God, I got too much going on. And honestly, like the thing behind it, and I think you said the word before, was fear. Like, what if I start this and no one cares? If no one listens, I put myself out there, right? But I've been so drawn to stories for years and years and years, and it seems like you are too. And I've just been so passionate that everyone has a story, and just really trying to get that out of people is like, you don't have to have like this huge conversion story. You don't have to maybe be doing this huge ministry, but are you going out and, loving on people? Are you going and, taking time to go into a nursing home? Like, everyone has something they're doing, and kind of seeing that, I think, can build people up a little bit more than like this person that has a huge platform that you're like, I can't even live up to that. I can't relate to that.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I'm so glad that you accept the call. That's beautiful, and I know that God is gonna grow it and use it wildly. That's a blessing, and it's so important, like you said, you're like, "Is there no one else?" Like, yeah, but for some reason, no one's paying attention to them. Well, not no one,
Right.
obviously. We are, but but sometimes it feels like that, and you're like, "Why?" So I'm so glad that you were like, "Nope, this ends here."
Well, well, do you believe everyone has a story?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone has a story, and also this is controversial, but I think everyone has something they can teach us, even if it's how not to be.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
but I think so. Absolutely. And like you said, I think that there's this pressure of like it being something big or whatever that means to people, but it's like, no. Like God uses everyone in such different ways. And it may seem small to you, but to someone else it may be like something big. It may be a light bulb moment. It may be encouragement to go after what God has been whispering to them. I mean, you don't know. Like again, God uses so much in ways that we have no idea and probably won't have any idea on this side of heaven. And so, absolutely, I believe that God has a purpose for each one of us. I mean, like, He knew us, He formed us in the womb. I mean, 100%. 100%.
Yeah. Well, the other word that I see on your website that really kind of spoke to me was the word witness.
Yeah.
So could you explain maybe in your words what you think witness means? 'Cause I feel like it's this kind of scary word, or a word that we know in Christianity, but we don't
Yeah.
know what it means. It's like, okay, witness, and then we don't do it because we don't know what it means.
Or they automatically think you're like Jehovah Witness or something. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's like it has like two meanings to me, right? Like the first meaning that stood out to me was it's really coming out of that verse where Jesus says, "You'll be my witnesses" in
Mhm.
Acts, right? Where he's like, "I will send you, Jerusalem, Judea, like Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." And so, I think that's beautiful, and the instruction is beautiful because it reminds us that. Jerusalem was home, right? And so it's like everything starts in our personal sphere. And the idea of the website is that it will not only reach your personal sphere of folks who are Christians and encourage them on their walk, but we're also hoping people share it with their sphere of influence, those who aren't people of faith. And the reason why is because of the other meaning that that has to me. Being an attorney, and I'm a litigator, so I do trials. And when you're preparing a trial, you prepare your witnesses, right? They're people who have firsthand knowledge of what has happened, and it's something important that makes a case for something. And so I think that people's stories, right, or a testimony, to give it another name, it's it's something that's so extremely powerful. When I was growing up, I was really into apologetics. Which is this idea of forming arguments, right, to defend your faith. And but what's interesting about a testimony is that no one can tell you it didn't happen to you, because it did. No one can be like, no, you weren't healed. It's like, no, actually I was. No one can really confront you with that. And that's the power of a personal testimony. And so I remember one year we did what was called Trial Month on Modern Witnesses, and it was all about witnessing. And really that's what it is. It's like trying to equip you know anyone who runs into the site, but our target audience is women, right, on how to share their stories, and why it's so important. Like, you have been a witness to something. We've all been witnesses to God in different ways, like how he's manifested his power, intervened for us, blessed us. And so the idea is that we can do that and do it without shame. Like, do it in a bold way that really impacts those around us. Scripture says that they overcame by the blood of the lamb and the power, right, of their testimony. So it's like, I think it's so important. And so that's really why I chose the word. It's like this acknowledgement that we have all seen something, right? Like, it's like the disciples used to say, we cannot speak of anything other than what we have seen. And the hope is that we can all be inspired to be that way and tell others and be like, listen, I don't know what you've been through and what your journey has been, but all I can share is what I have seen, right? Which is what God has done for me. And like I said, there's power in that because it's your story, and it's real.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And what I was hearing you say is that, like, yeah, you can't, I feel like this is what I've come to know through doing this for, a couple of years now, is that it's a little bit easier for someone to maybe listen to a podcast or read your stories that you have on there, uh, because it's not it's not really mostly in your face. It's mostly more of a, like you said, it's just my story. And like whether you like it or not, it is my story. And but people can relate to that maybe a little bit better. And I'm seeing more people that that probably wouldn't call themselves Christians, or just kind of like trying to figure out like what is this Jesus thing? But when it's just someone's story, it's much more like maybe relatable or easier to digest. Or um yeah, I remember the apologetics, and I've gone to different witnessing or testimonying, or like how do you evangelize kind of things, not saying that that might not work for some people, but in a way I think it's almost made it harder than it really needs to be, right? Like
Yeah,
just
I agree.
yeah.
I mean, doctrine and technique are all important and they have their place, but we have made this way more complicated than it needs to be, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Can you share on that a little bit?
No, I mean, I really want to hear the rest of your thought. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I just like, I fully agree that I think that, you know, we don't have to do everything. I think so much of our job spiritually is to really just introduce someone into just an inkling of who God is, to make them just want to see or experience or test that themselves.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes in like church circles, or just like we are thinking of like all the steps, like 20 steps, right? Like
Right.
all the way to baptism, like, and there's nothing wrong with that. All those things are important, but just thinking that, yeah, I think sometimes we underestimate what God can do. And that like it can also be a lot more organic. There doesn't need to be, I hate to use the word agenda, but for lack of a better word, it can feel like that sometimes where you feel like people
Yeah,
are
right, right.
and you're like, okay, relax. And so yeah, I mean, I just think that life, a spirit-led life where we're allowing God to lead our walk and who we cross paths with and all of these things, it lends itself to a lot of organic opportunities. And there's no need for 20 steps. All that's needed is just the courage to share.
Yeah. And I like what you said, is we've made it so much harder than it is, when a testimony, a witness is just saying what God's done in your life. And I feel like that takes the pressure off of someone trying to like learn what to say, but then that doesn't seem like really, it seems like too boxed, like,
Yeah.
do you say that to every single person you meet? Or like, you're
Yeah.
not coming across as someone that someone can be like, oh, you want to hear from me, you care about me, you didn't just say this exact same rote thing to every person. And I don't know how much that works, and I think that's why I'm seeing a shift of like a lot of people telling like we have to tell our story. We have to explain it in this way because this might be the way that we can actually like impact the kingdom.
Yeah. And I think that going back to one of the first points we made, that's why community is so important.
Mm.
When you mentioned, like, oh, this person cares, they want to hear from me. I mean, that's what Jesus said he wanted to see, right? Like us taking care of widows and like and- and this has been oversaid and it sounds almost cliche, but it's true. Like Jesus met people's needs first, right? And it's important that we can't have one without the other. And to be honest, the meeting people's needs part takes work. It takes relation. It takes time. It takes being inconvenienced or whatever we
Yeah.
convenience. Like those are the moments that life is actually made up of, right? And those are the moments where, like, looking back when I mentioned that I've also seen community come through for me in a wild way. It was inconvenient for someone else. It meant that person cared. Like those are the moments that become the highlights of the testimony. It's the really real, raw, unscripted moments that where we really open our hearts and take a beat and pause and see someone. Everyone wants to be seen. And that was the magic, well, not magic in the literal sense, but that was the beauty of who Jesus was, right? Like everyone who came into his presence was seen and seen in a profound way, not in a judgmental way. He saw their hearts
Mhm.
and he inspired them to more. And so I think that if Jesus is our example, that's what we should be doing. Like we need to stop and we need to look around us. And that can be hard because we live in a world with so much distraction and it's just like go, 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 you know? And I say that fully acknowledging like, you know, there's times where the train is delayed and you're like annoyed, but you just never know what's behind that and what the opportunity is. And you have to stop, look up from your phone and look around you. Like there's so many people who are hurting. We are hurting. And if we're hurting and we have faith and we have God and there's a lot of anguish out there that we can try to at least, even if we can't alleviate it, we can stand in solidarity with people through it.
Yeah, I like what you said and all that is like I think sometimes all someone needs to do is be seen and say, "Oh, like you actually asked how I'm doing and you care." Like I
Yeah.
think that alone, but that takes like looking at people and having more than 2 seconds to say, "Hey," and actually taking time for someone.
Yeah, it's like it's simple, but it's not. Given everything that's competing for our attention. It's like the most simple thing, but yet it's hard for us. And so that's the interesting thing. And it's yeah, we've made life just in general more complicated than it needs to be. So it's like we're being called to return to the simple. And it's like, just look up, just look at that person in front of you.
But
That
isn't
can
right, I was just thinking, isn't that what the kind of the gospel is it's actually very simple.
yeah,
Mean, I know there's a lot of layers, but at the very core of it, love
yeah,
God, love others,
yep.
and to actually live it out. It's
It's hard. That's because all the simplicity goes against our nature. I was listening to a pastor the other day who was saying this, where he's like, hope, despair, negativity, that's easy. It's easy because that's what we're wired for now, like being sinful beings. What's hard is love and hope. And again, it's so simple, but because it goes against our natural nature, it's hard. And so it's like, yeah, the gospel is so simple, but it's so hard. Like because it goes against everything our nature wants to do. But that's, I guess, also the amazing thing is that we can't take credit for it because then when we do live it out, it's God in us. And what greater privilege, right? Like there's so many faiths where you go somewhere to pray and what greater privilege that we have God in us. Like if we invite God, he's in us. Like and that's the same power that we just had Easter like that rose Jesus from the dead. Like it's God. And I think again, we don't realize what we have. We minimize it, we box it in, we I don't know, add a script and think about it in a certain way, but God is beyond anything we can imagine. And Jesus did things in such an unconventional way. He was always what people didn't expect. He always did things in the way that people felt was backwards. And so again, it's simple, but it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, and I told this to someone a while, not very long ago, as I was saying, I wonder how impactful community can be in our lives if I feel like the world is telling us so badly not to be. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
wonder, I
that
wonder, like how much this really matters if it's so easy not to. Like, it's like,
mhm.
yeah, I won't know go to that. I won't go to the Bible study. I won't go to that. I got something else to do today. And it's like, ooh, I wonder if it's because it's really that life changing.
There's a narrative trying to lead us away from what we need. And
Hmm.
that's where discernment comes in. That's why we have to be so rooted in truth and in knowing what God wants for us, because there is so much noise and so many voices out there. It's really easy to get sidetracked, whether it's out of convenience, out of wanting social acceptance, so much, right? That appeals to our pride and just who we are as humans. But I think you're right. I think, yeah, every time we see something like that, I think we're onto something when we're like, what is behind this?
Right,
Probably means this is important.
right. Yeah. Well, I cannot believe that like 35 minutes has already gone by. So not
Oh,
fair. We'll have to do this again. But what is your favorite Bible verse or story?
I would say I have like two favorite stories. One like Old Testament, one New Testament. I think in the Old Testament, my favorite is the story of the three Hebrew boys. Who get thrown into the fire because they refuse to bow down. I think that there is something wildly courageous about what they did, and just the way they said, even if God doesn't intervene, like we believe in this, and this is our conviction. And I think that this story illustrates, everyone was there, all the people were there, and I think that when thinking about stories, I think sometimes when we're going through very difficult moments, God sets up the story in the same way. He sets up a platform where everyone is watching.
Mm,
And then when you do something, even if you end up in the fire, it gives the opportunity for people to then look into the fire and be like, I think I just saw God in there with them. And I find that so powerful. I love that story. I love the faith, the conviction, and most of all, the promise that he stands with us in the fire. And in the New Testament, I would say the story of Lazarus. I am obsessed with that story for many reasons. It obviously shows it's a foreshadowing of all that God plans to do when he restores all and makes things right. This promise of eternal life that it's only through him. But I also see it as a reminder to us just in this moment that God can redeem so much and resurrect so much. Like there's nothing impossible. I think my favorite verse in that passage is when Jesus tells Martha, did I not tell you that if you believe, you would see the glory of God?
mm,
That to me is something that I often repeat to myself. I think life is full of twists and turns, and don't get me wrong, really dark moments. It gets dark and it gets bleak, but he is life. And he tells us if you believe, you will see the glory of God. And I don't know what that means in every single circumstance, but that's a promise. And I love it. And I love the beauty of that story, of dead, coming to life. And so I'd say those two stories are ones that I always hold close to my heart.
oh, those are good. What are you grateful for?
Oh wow, so much, so much, like so many blessings. Um, and I mean that truly, like as someone who, again, I've had my own journey. Um, I've experienced, family, tearing apart, parents divorce, like housing insecurity. Like we all have like the story, and I don't. take things for granted. Like literally every time I pay my rent, I'm like, thank you, God, like for this roof over my head, like just everything. I recognize his provision. I feel so blessed beyond measure. Like I look around, I'm like, I have more than I could ever, have imagined in the past. And I think God gives to us so we can be generous and give to others. And so it's like I'm just grateful for so much. My health, my family. I just recently got married. So that was obviously a really big moment. Um, and a beginning of a new chapter. Just everything. And I'm also grateful for, I live in a very difficult city. I move around and work here. It's not the safest place. And so, I pray every time I leave my house, and just I have felt God's protection in so many ways. Just I see it everywhere. And so I'm grateful that I'm just still here, and despite the difficulties, New York's been good to me. And family, health, can't ask for more.
Well, well, Gabriela, I have loved our conversation. I felt like we just had just a wonderful back and forth and chat, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. And we will link Modern Witnesses because I know that people are going to want to look at that and find more stories and then hopefully tell their story.
I would love that. And we have like a little tab where it says get noticed. So if you would like to share your story affirmatively, like please drop us a note there. Again, so excited to run your story. And I've just been so honored. Thank you. This has been such a beautiful conversation. I've been blessed by it. So thank you so much for having me. It means a lot.
Thank you.